Thank you. A warm welcome back to committee. Our next agenda item is to take evidence on sporting events of national interest. We're joined by Ian Maxwell, Chief Executive of the Scottish Football Association, and I wonder if I could have an opening question of the suggestion that you gave us that any proposal to include qualifying matches under Group A of listed events regime must be considered carefully given the significant commercial implications for Scottish football. It's quite difficult to see any trail of the money when you're looking at the accounts of yourself and UEFA and other organisations to see how that would impact on frontline Scottish football. So I wonder if you could just explain that in more detail.
Yeah, happy to, and good morning everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to come and discuss this. When you talk about trail of money, I mean, we effectively have a number of income streams that goes into the big pot, and we use that big pot to promote and develop and grow Scottish football up and down the country. So it's not necessarily siloed in as much as that revenue comes in and does this specifically. But the figures that we're talking about, the UEFA TV revenue that we receive is our single biggest income stream. The Men's A, generally the income we receive through the Men's A squad, whether that's gate receipts, whether that's commercial opportunities, adds to that, and that is the biggest single revenue driver for the association, and that money is then used to fund women's football up and down the country, from national team level right through to grassroots. It funds obviously boys grassroots football, referee recruitment and development. You know, we've launched our own facility fund, and it all plays a part in that. So when you think about the Scottish Football Association, we are a business which, on an average year, without Euro qualification and anything like that, will turn over around about £50 million. So from a revenue perspective, as a business, we are small. The challenge we have is we are the national association for the biggest sport in the country by a considerable distance, and don't have anything like the funding that we would love to have to go and do what football can do up and down the country. So we need to make the best use of the funding that we've got. And, you know, as we said in the letter, that any change to the listed rights scheme would reduce the commercial attractiveness and the commercial opportunity within the broadcasting market, and that would have an impact, and that impact ultimately would lead to the stopping of some sort of football activity round the country. So,
if I'm clear, UEFA get the money for the broadcasting rights, and they distribute that to you.
Yeah. So
what's the significant difference? And I understand this will be commercial, but is there a significant difference between what an online or private company would bid for and what a public broadcaster would bid for in terms of income?
Yeah. Okay. And you reduce competition in the market by removing the ability for anybody who wants to show those rights to be able to bid for them. You reduce the competitive tension within the marketplace, because if there's a requirement for it has to be free to air, you know, the subscribers or the subscription-based companies could bid for them and show them on a free to air basis. There's nothing to stop them doing that, but obviously their model's completely different. And you know, I don't know many national associations around the country where that is what happens. It usually happens that if it's a listed scheme, then it goes through a national broadcaster like a BBC or STV or whatever that might be.
So would you be in favour of removing all of the listed events that affect Scottish football?
What do you
mean? So that they weren't able to show any of the football matches on BBC or STV or public broadcasting channels?
Fundamentally, we want as much exposure as we can. Right. So if it's BBC, if it's STV, whatever forum that takes, that has to be our objective, because we want to grow the game. But we need to consider the implications of that change. That's the point. That's the position that we have.
Okay, Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Gabriela. Good morning, Ian. It's nice to see you again. Obviously, I won't go on about the fact you're a St Mirren legend, and most people wouldn't know that. But take that into account when I ask these questions, you know, because it's not personal. What the hell is VAR all about? No, it's basically my actual question on the issue is the fact that you say it's a third of your turnover, but the convener's quite right. It's almost quasi-secret society trying to trace down the money from UEFA to yourselves And it's only in a press release that I was managed to work out that it's a third of, or 33% of your actual budget. You know, so, you know, do you not think that's a bit of an issue for us as fans or the committee itself or national game, that it's difficult for us to actually be able to follow the money? Because you're saying to us, well, most of it goes into grassroots football, women's football, but the problem is the difficulty is actually being able to follow it when it comes from UEFA itself.
There's obviously a commercial sensitivity around the agreement with UEFA, so, you know, like all other national associations, we centralised all our rights. UEFA go and distribute them and sell them as best they can, and UEFA give us a guaranteed amount off the back of that. Now, I don't even know the amount that UEFA get for our rights. I'm not party to that information. That's commercially sensitive between UEFA and the broadcaster, so I don't know what that number is. The only number I know is the number that UEFA give us, and I mean, because of the commercial sensitivity, we can't get into that. You'll have seen in the paperwork that was provided, there was a report in 2009 at which point the Scottish FA said that they thought the impact would be £12 million. Now that was pre-centralisation, obviously a long time before me, and I don't know.
Or also said free-to-air TV was probably the best route, though.
I don't know how it could be the best route if they were saying that the impact would be 12 million.
But they were also saying for the impact
revenue.
of the game to actually be able to, as you said yourself, to be able to see the game being able to be seen by as many people as possible. That was the reason they were saying it, because more people would actually see it in the end up.
There's no doubt, and the figures will show that if this is just about viewers, then free-to-air makes sense. But from our perspective, it's not just about viewers, it's about activity. And I think when we talk about the Scottish FA and the revenue that we get and what we spend our money on, I just want to be clear, we don't fund professional elite clubs to any significant degree. The biggest amount of funding that they get is through Club Academy Scotland, and that's based on criteria that they need to meet. The income that we get goes to, as I said, men's and women's youth national teams, from A squad down to youth level. It goes into grassroots development, whether that's boys, whether that's girls, whether that's the support that we give our national associations, whether that's the staff that we've got around the country that are helping to grow the game, whether that's the programmes that we've got that are into communities. So we don't, as a business, separate that money comes in, so that needs to be spent on that. We're not big enough, we don't have the resources to do it that way, because we need to make decisions on an annual basis on where the priorities are and what we think we need to, where we think we need to divert our revenue to have the biggest impact. Like I said, you know, we are a small business in financial terms with a responsibility for, you know, there are over 1 million people that engage in football in some way, shape or form throughout Scotland on a regular basis. So to try and impact that positively, given the finances we've got, is difficult, and we need to be very sure and very clear about what we're doing. But it's not as simple for us as, you know, we don't get money in and that goes out to professional clubs to help St Mirren's or whoever sign players. That's not the way we work as that's not the way we work as an association. Our fundamental objective is the power of football, is growing the game, is making an impact on communities, and that takes a variety of forums and a variety of activity.
But the recent scenario was a bit of a sham with Viaplay. In April 2022, they got the rights through the centralised UEFA kind of ideal. And then all of a sudden, because of whatever happened with Viaplay themselves and withdrawing from various markets, we had a situation where everybody was trying to watch it on YouTube, and then SFA, was it SFA that was doing the actual feed? It was Viaplay.
It was through Viaplay, yeah.
Aye, but basically we ended up doing it, and that's madness to end up in a position like that, you know, where our national team is effectively on kind of, yeah, everybody could see it, but it wasn't a perfect platform to be watching it. So surely, you know, do we not open ourselves up to this kind of scenario where somebody will bid for it? We don't know how it goes about. Okay, there's a difficulty in the transparency to be able to get that, and we end up in a situation where our national team, we don't have games, or we end up in a platform that's not really acceptable.
I think which platform is acceptable is an interesting point, because if you look at the demographic now, if you look at kids now, they spend their time on YouTube, they spend their time on social media platforms. They don't sit and watch 90 minutes of football the way us as the older generation will do. So there is a change in the broadcast market. The benefit of the YouTube And YouTube wasn't ideal, but it was free to air, and the viewer numbers were really, really good, and people actually got used to it over the 2 or 3 games it was on. So I think there's probably a bit of a preconceived, oh well, it's on YouTube, that can't be right.
It was the type of production it was, effectively.
Yeah,
it was effectively, there is no it was like our national team was looked as upon as if it was just, there was no build-up to the game. It wouldn't have happened to any other nation. Yeah. No build-up to the game, no analysis of the game, just the game.
Yeah.
That's just that. Surely you admit that wasn't acceptable.
That wasn't good enough. There were specific circumstances around about that though, because of the issues that Viaplay were facing. Northern Ireland had the same challenges. I think Wales did as well. But because of the issues that Viaplay were facing and over those specific matches, that you're right. The production and the service round about the game wasn't good enough, but I don't think I would discount YouTube necessarily as a platform.
But it's more the production value.
Right. I accept that. I accept that.
Because I understand the biggest broadcaster in Scotland is slowly but surely becoming YouTube at the moment. But one of the finally questions, I'm surprised when you mentioned some of the money goes towards referee training and recruitment. That'd be interesting to see how that works. But on the whole, is my question, do you think we're now in a position where we've got the best of both worlds? The BBC are showing it free to air and they've managed to get the rights.
Yep.
Now, do you think, obviously ITV, there's a multi-million deal with ITV in England. Do you think that the BBC as an organisation, if it comes to the rights again, should look at it not just as BBC Scotland, but look at it as possibly BBC as the whole of the UK and make an actual bid for organisations like that to try and make it free to air? Because for BBC Scotland's budget, it's much like yourself, they're a small fish in a big ocean.
I would absolutely encourage them to do that. As I said, fundamentally we want as much exposure as we can get to our national teams, but we need to assess that alongside the commercial imperative and the commercial reality that we've got. So I have absolutely no problem. BBC should be looking at it. I would like to think they are. I would like to think they've seen the increase or the viewer numbers that we've had, given the World Cup campaign that we're in the midst of. I'm sure the numbers for Denmark and the Greece games that are upcoming in November will be as high as they've seen, and hopefully that can convince them that it's absolutely worth making the right commercial offering to UEFA. There are other options around about that as well, because when it was the Viaplay deal, S4C, who are the Welsh language channel, had free-to-air rights for those matches. So there is an opportunity. It doesn't always have to be a primary broadcaster that has it on free-to-air. So at that point, S4C effectively go and do a deal with Viaplay. They own the rights. S4C come along and say, listen, we want to show some of it on a Welsh-speaking only channel. There's then a commercial negotiation between them, which will effectively be Viaplay saying, well, we think if we do that, we'll lose X. So you need to give us X for the right to do that. Well, so that's not as, sorry, just to finish that, that's not the same as buying the full package and paying, paying the rights for it. So you look at BBC Alba, there's no reason why an Alba couldn't do a similar deal from a Gaelic language channel, and obviously that would get it on free to air across the country.
Because one of the challenges that we tend to have is the fact that when you look at the game itself is, okay, they could put various bids for free-to-air television to do it, but for, as I say, that's challenging the budget itself is. But one of the things we don't talk about is the fact that when they're behind a paywall, there's many people out there that are accessing it and not paying through the paywall legitimately. So surely that has a kind of kickback in sporting events as well.
That's a challenge generally across broadcasting. Piracy is a big issue when you speak to any of the broadcasters. That's the biggest thing on their agenda at the moment is how we deal with piracy. So yes, it does have an impact, because if there's any, and I'm not just talking about sport, because anybody that watches anybody, anytime you speak to anybody and you ask them what they're watching on the telly, the next question is what channel is it on, because everybody's watching different things and everybody's paying subscription channels for different TV programmes. So yeah, that is a huge issue for broadcasters, and that's something that obviously they're working on. If the Scottish FA can work in partnership with them to try and impact that, then we will do. I don't know.
Because I would say with sport it's particularly an issue, because a lot of people do it to access sport in general.
Yeah, I think they do to access sport and TV more generally. Yeah,
and it has a long-term kickback on
it will do. Income. Yeah, it will do. And listen, who knows what the broadcast market's going to look like in 15, 20 years' time. I've mentioned earlier that youngsters don't watch TV and don't sit and engage in 90 minutes of football now. They've got their iPad on at the same time, they've got their phone on at the same time, they're watching clips of things rather than sitting and engaging in 90 minutes. So
the SFA's opinion on free-to-air television is he pays your money, he gets the deal. Is that it?
The SFA's opinion on free-to-air television is that we want as many people to watch the games as possible, but there's a commercial reality that we are involved in, and we want to have a conversation about what that looks like. And that I think that I don't want us to get bogged down in just football specifically, because there's a bigger sporting challenge that we have as a country here that we're not doing well enough in, and I don't want this to become the kind of the single issue that we're looking at, because you know, you look at investment in sport across the country. There was a doubling of the sports budget, which hasn't happened yet. Sport investment from Sports Scotland through the Scottish Government into sports generally is at best staying the same, which in real terms means that it's actually going down, because cost of facilities are increasing, the cost to participate is increasing. So we're actually seeing less activity at a time when everybody wants the country to see more activity, and everybody talks, and we will talk very passionately about the benefits of physical activity and the impact that that can have on individuals and communities. So I think there's actually a bigger conversation, because what does it look like? If we thought for a minute that BBC could come, they would go and do a deal with UEFA, and we knew that if UEFA come to us and say, because of this, your money's reduced, that's the commercial reality that we live in. If there was a wider conversation about, right, what does that look like, to recompenses for that, to make sure that we don't have to stop activity, because that can't be anybody's objective. That doesn't make any sense, given the country, given the times that we're living through. But also, what else are we doing alongside that to look at sport, to look at prevention, to look at the benefits that sport has, and how we increase funding into that? Because, and I know we're a football association, we talk about this all the time, and we talk very passionately about it. There is no better investment that a government can make in terms of happier, healthier, more people, more active, all the things that the Scottish Government framework wants to achieve. Football can help it do, and sport more generally can help it do. So how do we wrap that up into a bigger conversation about where we're going as a country, rather than focusing on a particularly kind of isolated sport and what that means?
Well, Ian, you've managed to segue into something we both agree on right enough. You seem to be sulky in the committee more than you were in the football field. But that's everything, thanks.
Thank you. I should have declared an interest, as I'm a member of Motherwell Football Club Trust. Can I bring in Mr Halker-Johnson, please?
Hi, morning again.
Morning.
Yeah, I mean, just to go through, I don't want to kind of go over the same points again, but I think one of the great frustrations as somebody that watches quite a lot of football is rather the point that George makes. Well, firstly about the kind of standard production, but also nowadays, if you want to support, if you want to follow particularly clubs, you've almost got to have about 18 different subscriptions, and I think that's a great frustration for a lot of people. And I wonder, firstly, I suppose, whether you think that model will change, because what seems to happen is that a new entrant comes into the broadcasting arena, bids high to get sports, whether it's the Scotland games or whatever it happens to be, does it, and then goes off because they've got the kind of the subscribers, and then moves on, and somebody else comes in. Firstly, do you think that's something that's likely to continue? And also, I'm kind of really torn on this, because I recognise, I watched the Scottish Cup final, which people will know Aberdeen won, in a pub. There's a huge, huge camaraderie from that, but it's vital for our hospitality sector. But I'm also conscious that obviously excludes a huge number of people coming through. Just wondering what you thought the impact on the next generation of having free-to-air is. Do you see, if Scotland firstly are on free-to-air TV, but also successful, what impact that has on take-up of the sport, participation, that kind of thing? So I'll leave it for now and let you come and ask.
Yeah, so to answer the first question first around about the subscription model, you're right, there have been new entrants. There haven't been that many recently, and I think from a Scottish football perspective, we've been fortunate, and we do always consider the amount of subscriptions that people will need to watch football. So if you look at Scottish football at the minute, men's and women's national team games are on BBC. We've got Sky as the main partner of the league, and we've got Premier Sports as a league partner, and Premier Sports are also a Scottish Cup partner. So of the main major competitions between SPFL, SWPL and Scottish Cup, Premier Sports, Scottish Gas, Scottish Cup, Premier Sports Cup, they're all on either BBC, Sky or Premier. So whilst it's two subscription broadcasters, that could be worse, and we do try and make decisions that limit the amount that we're going to have to ask supporters to pay. What that looks like in the future, I think, is a really good question. You know, obviously we're a national association within UEFA, and that is a regular topic of conversation as broadcast rights, it's value, it's what does that landscape look like, it's how are people going to be watching football in years to come. You talked about the impact on the next generation, as I've said. You know, I mean, I've got a 24-year-old son who will sit and watch some football, but he's doing 2 or 3 other things at the same time. That's just the way the world is now, and we need to be aware of that. And a lot of sports are looking at their offering and how they engage, particularly that younger audience. I think that a big driver, and we saw this off the back of England winning the Euros, the Women's Euros, fairly recently, is that success on the pitch. That is the biggest thing that drives positivity and engagement around the country, is success on the pitch, and that's where this is all linked, because you know the revenue that we get, if we're investing that in the academies or if we're helping grow the grassroots game, that will ultimately develop the players that in 20-25 years time will be successful on the pitch and will help to grow that engagement. So it's all a cycle. We can't split things out and look at them in isolation. So you know, the positivity that we've seen around the national team for the last 4 or 5 years has been fantastic. You know, we've obviously got a great chance of qualifying for the World Cup next year, and that will continue to grow engagement. It wasn't that long ago that we were in Nations League C, we were playing Kazakhstan, and it felt like we played Israel every other week at that point. And there was, you know, 18,000 people at Hampden. That also has an impact on how we can develop the game, because you know there's a chunky difference between a 17,000 capacity or sales target for a game and a 50,000, as we're seeing at the minute, and what we do with all that revenue. But as I said, that all goes back into development of football up and down the country. So listen, all these conversations are always ongoing. We're always, as I said, we always need to be aware of the subscription model and not putting supporters under too much pressure at a time when we know the financial challenges that everybody has up and down the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think you talk about younger people. There may well have been people reading notes for this committee this morning, maybe watching games last night as well at the same time. It's not just young people who get distracted by these things. But I suppose, and again, I mean, even the games last night, because I really want to come on what the alternatives are and what the impact's going to be. In the games last night, there was one game on Sky. There were a lot on the club channels, you know, Kilmarnock or Celtic TV and the like. Do you see that as an opportunity kind of further down the line for the club? I mean, take it you don't get it, or do you get a share of that if it's a game based on a club TV channel? That's
no, well, I mean the league matches, so that sits within the SPFL, but no, even from a league perspective, they don't get any revenue. That's an additional club revenue stream, and that's becoming more and more important, particularly when you look at the number of supporters of our clubs round the world that want to watch football matches. Yeah.
Okay. I suppose the kind of obvious question is then if there is a change that's being suggested, and obviously you're opposed to, what happens? I mean, I represent the Highlands and Islands. We've got obviously the Highland League, which is very important. You know, Orkney, where I'm from, are in the North Caledonian League. What happens? Is there an impact that you see on those leagues, those clubs, those communities?
There's just an impact generally across football. I mean, the simple reality is if our funding reduces, some activity has to stop. Now, we would have to make some difficult decisions on what that looks like. But as I said, when you look at what we are trying to achieve, you know, we've got a Women's World Cup, which we are the sole bidders for, and hopefully will be confirmed with the rest of the home nations as hosting that in 2035. It would make absolutely no sense not to be able to engage as much as we can with girls and women's football over the next 10 years to make that a real milestone event. And you know, I mean, that's a huge event to be bringing to the country, and the impact that would have would be really significant. And it defies logic to make a decision that we know is going to negatively impact the amount of activity that we can undertake in a girls' and women's space, as an example. So I can't sit here and say if that money reduces, this is what the impact would be specifically. What I can say is it will have a significant impact, and football activity up and down the country will be impacted and will have to stop as a result, unless there's something else that comes along to fill in that hole. And actually that's my point. We shouldn't just be talking about filling in that hole, we should be talking about the bigger sporting landscape and how as a country we actually make ourselves a sporting nation, because we're a sporting nation because a lot of people watch football, a lot of people go to football. We're not a sporting nation, and as much as we don't participate anything like when you look at our European counterparts, we're miles away from where they are in terms of physical activity. And how do we change that?
Frustration, I think, when we had the Olympics and even with the Commonwealth Games, I always felt that we don't build on that legacy. And you know, I've been involved in sports clubs, and even there, when you look at the national bodies, and this isn't necessarily football, this is other sports, but you know, they're not taking advantage to actually build on, you know, the huge coverage, the huge success of that. I suppose, you know, just on that point that you're talking about, other, you know, how you take it forward, how you build on it. Are you looking potentially at other revenue streams? Are there other ways that you could, if not plug the gap, at least? I mean, I'm sure you're looking at them anyway because you're always looking for a kind of thing. But are there other areas that you're investigating now? Maybe not around the broadcast side, because I appreciate there's a limit of what you are able to do around that. If it's UEFA do the contracts, and then obviously the leagues are a different organisation.
Listen, we are always looking commercially at how we can improve investment into the country and the country and into Scottish football. Obviously, it's a challenge. You know, as I said, we are a small business, so even a 10% increase in commercial revenue, which from a business perspective is a big percentage, that's still only £4 or £5 million. That doesn't let us go and do a huge amount, you know, because of the size of business that we are. So we will do as much as we can. We have committed to doing as much as we can. You know, we've launched our own facilities fund and said that through our own investment, through philanthropic investment, through work with government, through partnerships with businesses, we want to raise 50 million over the next 5 years to improve facilities up and down the country. That's been born out of the situation that we're in, where because of the fiscal challenges that government and local authorities have, there has been very, very limited investment in the local facilities at a time when we're going to grow the game. So, I mean, you touched on the impact and making the best of the impact that these mega events have. That's great in theory, but when people want to play football, the first thing is they need somewhere to play. And at the moment we're seeing a decline in facilities up and down the country at a point when football participation numbers are continuing to grow. So those two things don't align, they don't make sense. So we've taken it upon ourselves that we know there's a problem, what do we want to do to try and fix it? And I mean, that's another area where if there's a significant reduction in our income, that would have to stop that facility investment as well, which again sets us back because you're not giving people that want to play the ability to do so. So listen, it's all linked, it's all a sporting ecosystem that we need to make sure we're developing and driving as properly as we can.
So there's a kind of bit of good news, but the worry is that we might not be able to take advantage. Just kind of last question I was going to ask is around the commercial relationships. You know, I was just wondering how those have changed. You know, most obviously sponsorship, but there'll be other commercial relationships that the SFA have. Where's that kind of picture at the moment in terms of how successful, whether it can improve, if it's getting more difficult?
I mean, commercially we're in a really good place. I mean, most of the major assets that we have as a business are sold. You know, when you think about cup sponsorship, national team sponsors, we are not permitted under UEFA regulations to put a sponsor on the front of the national team shirt, and there would be a big debate if we were ever allowed to do so. I'm sure people would have an opinion on that. But from a commercial perspective, we are driving revenues as much as we possibly can. You know, we're having more concerts more regularly at Hampden. We're looking at the stadium to see how much we can generate revenue from that, not just as a football stadium. You know, we've got Glasgow Warriors played there last December, they're going to play there this December, and we're looking, you know, at the stadium as a big revenue driver. There is a commercial imperative around the stadium as well, because like every stadium across the country, they are of an age, and Hampden's of an age, and it needs investment, and it needs, you know, significant amounts of money on an annual basis just to keep the lights on. So we need to be aware of that. But I mean, it's part of my job from an association point of view to make sure that the commercial income that we receive is as high as it possibly can be, and that's something that we're absolutely very focused on.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Bibby.
Good morning, Mr. Maxwell.
Morning.
And, I see Calvin Harris is doing concert in the summer at Hampden Park. That was announced yesterday. That's great news. I was just, obviously, we've talked a lot about the balance between accessibility and cash, and also the impact on young people. We obviously want to showcase the game, the men's game, the women's game, to the next generation, to inspire them to get involved in football. But equally, at the same time, it's not just about that. We want to provide them with the opportunities, the youth coaching opportunities to go and be the footballers of the future as well. So it is a difficult balance to be struck. I think we all want it to be free to air, and we all want to ensure that there's proper resources there for Scottish football. At the moment, though, in terms of we have free to air qualifiers with the BBC, and we've got the resource that follows from that. I think George described that as the best of both worlds. Is this the optimum situation where we have got the free to air and the resource?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The optimum situation would be free to air with a bit more money coming towards us for the TV rights. But I get that's something for UEFA to discuss. But yeah, what we have at the moment gives the best of both worlds, because we've got a secure level of income and there's as much exposure as we can get.
I mean, obviously, if that was to change in terms of not being free to air, I think so we need to look at it again. This is the first time the committee's taken evidence, oral evidence on the issue. Obviously, in terms of the financial challenges you mentioned earlier, the Scottish Government and the sports budget more generally, promises made to double the sports budget, that hasn't happened. In fact, there's been a real terms cut. So that's obviously the wider context, which I think is important. Sport's not part of our remit in this committee, but obviously broadcasting is, and we need to consider that in that context. The Scottish Government have also, the Cabinet Secretary has said they support the qualifiers, men's and women's, being listed as Category A. But given the concerns that have been raised about funding, can I just ask, has the Scottish Government given an indication that they would be meeting any shortfall in principle that may arise from that listing?
No, there's been no commitment given. They've obviously asked the question and are keen to understand what that would mean, but there's been no commitment given, no.
Okay, that's helpful to know. And my last question was just to get some clarity around the process around UEFA, because obviously we've got that balance to be struck. There has to be discussions and commercial sensitivities, and it's done through UEFA. I just obviously, in terms of that bidding process, I think in striking that balance right, there needs to, if it's just purely about who the highest bidder is, and you had, say, a bidder coming in from, just for argument's sake, £5 million from Sky Sports, but the BBC bid 4.9 million, and there was a difference of 100,000 or a small amount. The margins there in terms of getting that balance right, just by going for the highest bidder, I think you would be getting the balance wrong. Is that something that is factored in or can be factored in, just to try and get that balance right? Because if it's just purely the highest bidder, then we would be getting that wrong.
No, listen, it's a really good point, and that definitely would be a conversation. I mean, we do have conversations with UEFA at the point that the bidding process is ongoing. It's never been at the point where it's been anywhere near in terms of value, so there's never been that discussion to be had. But UEFA fundamentally want as many eyes on European football as they possibly can. They want to grow and develop the game. They will attribute a value to, when they're assessing bids, they will look at the financial benefit, but they will also look at potential viewership and what those numbers look like. You have to take that all together. You have to look at all those things in the round. So that would definitely be a conversation that we would be keen to have with them, and I'm sure they would have that with us before they made a decision, because it's about growing the game. Whether you're UEFA, whether you're the Scottish FA, whether you're a club at any level, it's about growing the game. It's about that engagement. So that those conversations would definitely be had.
Thank you, Camille.
Mr. Kerr, please.
I'm interested as to what alternative business models the SFA can see happening elsewhere. I mean, you're very constrained, aren't you, by UEFA in a sense? But what are the other business models you've looked at and thought that might work in terms of maximising audience and generating the revenue that you need?
From a broadcast point of view?
Well, yeah, but you can be broader than that if you want.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, we've been pretty focused on what we've got and maintaining what we've got. There has to be a look, and as I touched on, UEFA are always looking at what the next step is, or what the next stage in the broadcast market is going to be. You know, they set up, not that long ago, they set up UEFA TV. They've been having some matches on a free-to-air basis on UEFA TV. You know, every so often there's the conversation that comes about Scottish football and should there be a Scottish football TV model. That only works if it's subscription, though. We couldn't do that on a free-to-air basis because
you could have free-to-air games occasionally mixed in with the subscription stuff.
You
so
could,
yeah,
you could do that, yeah. But obviously the value that comes is because people want to watch the high profile matches,
yeah.
So you need to strike that balance.
Yeah.
So there's not been real serious discussions about necessarily another business model, but there's always discussions about what is the commercial landscape, what does the broadcasting landscape look like, what are we seeing in other countries, how are they dealing with these things. But it's a
consideration at the minute, though, to have
I think it's
SFA TV.
No. That's not an active consideration at the minute. I wouldn't say anything's ever off the table, and you always have to be aware of what the options might be and what it might look like, because, I mean, we just don't know what the subscription model generally is going to look like over the coming years.
Do you talk, I mean, you presumably talk to the FA, the Welsh FA, you know, other football associations in you know, in Britain and Ireland, about some kind of collaboration, anything there, because that's a lot of commercial muscle in just those football associations, including, of course, Ireland.
Yeah, we've never really had a conversation about doing anything joined up. I mean, again, it comes back to if you do that, then that only makes sense if it's a commercially viable opportunity, and for that to happen, it has to be subscription-based. So I think that
it'll give you more control.
Over the longer term, there could be something, and I touched on earlier, you know, we've got league games, cup games, League Cup games, Women's League games, Women's Cup games, national team games. There's a lot of inventory, and you know, every National Association will be looking at that over the longer term. The deal that we've got with UEFA is until 2032, so we'll be looking beyond that and going, right, what does that look like? Those conversations will happen would
UEFA see that as a threat if the SFA and the FA and the Irish FA and the Welsh FA, if you all got together, would that be seen as an attempt to compete?
No, I don't think UEFA would see it as a threat, because I think UEFA would see it as what's the best thing for football. How do we get the most? What's the most attractive proposition for football? So I don't think necessarily they would see it as a threat.
But they are a huge commercial entity. We've got a bill in front of us at the minute.
They are. But I mean, if you look at the broadcast revenue as a standalone, whatever UEFA receive, it goes out through the centralisation deal to all of the national associations. UEFA income is generated by Euros, which are every 4 years, by Champions League. You know, it's not. The broadcast sector and the broadcast revenue that UEFA receive isn't a revenue generator for them, because they do distribute it back across the national association. So I don't think they would necessarily see that as a threat. I think they would potentially see it, if the case was strong enough, they would see it as an opportunity, because, you know, as the governing body for European football, they obviously want to grow the game.
Have you ever done a calculation on the number of viewers being excluded because of the current arrangements as opposed to free to air? There will be a particular group in terms of...
If it's on a subscription?
Well, yeah. If the qualifiers, some people may be just seeing them as highlights on YouTube as opposed to being able to actually watch them as if they chose to do that. But you're actually saying something very interesting, because you're saying actually the younger demographic, which obviously is important to sell football too, they actually prefer to take their football in the highlights packages on YouTube.
In smaller chunks, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So there's some commercial challenges down the line, even in terms of subscription channels selling football
I don't think anybody can tell you what the broadcast market will look like in 20 years' time. I don't think anybody knows. You know, you look at the technology that we've got.
We've had broadcasters in front of us recently. I can concur with your sentiment. They don't know what they're...
It's not out with the realms of possibility that at some point in the future we're all be sitting at home with a VR headset on.
Yeah,
like
at the game, sitting in our armchairs.
That is not far from becoming a reality, I don't think. So the technology moves on constantly, and we just need to make sure that we're up to date and aware of the challenges that are coming.
The key thing from my questions is basically a different business model is not on the agenda at the minute, and something more grandiose is certainly not on the agenda. No. And collaboration across the football authorities in the United Kingdom and Ireland, not on the agenda either.
From a broadcast,
so you're quite content with the current arrangement, really?
I think we are where we are, but we need to keep an eye looking forward and understand what's going to come down the line in future years.
Okay.
Are there any further questions. I wonder if I could ask, so as someone who's not a frequent football goer, as they say, or takes part in it, but I do have the Centre of Excellence at Braidhurst in my constituency. I've visited it many times. I see the excellent work and the altruistic impact of having that, and what it does for the community and the wider school. But you're trying to balance those ambitions for the football, but always going back to talking about commercial viability in it. And I appreciate that you have to, you know, have an income stream. But it seems to me that getting that audience, particularly in women's football, is what UEFA should be striving for, and yourselves, in that, you know, there's all that, you have to see it to be it. We've seen that with the Lionesses and all the, you know, the impact that has had on the English women's football. So, do you think, we talked about a different business model there, do you think there's too much emphasis on maximising the commercial value and not balancing that against the other altruistic aims of the football associations in each country?
I don't think there's too much. I think we're always cognizant of both. I mean, the example I'll give you is, and particularly in the girls and women's space, we made a decision to move the women's games to Hampden. Obviously, the men play there. We felt it was right that the women play there. Actually, through conversations with the players and with the staff involved in the women's team, we've made a decision that says we've done the wrong thing for the right reasons, because actually where the girls' women's game is at the moment, it's more important to take that round the country. So we had a game on Tuesday night at Dunfermline. There was 6,000 people there. Really good game. Team played really well. We've had games at Easter Road. You know, we are looking at where we can take girls' women's football around the country. Now that is not a commercial decision. We make a significant investment into women's football on an annual basis that doesn't at this point in time return anything commercially, but we're happy to do that and we're committed to doing that. So I get the commercial question that you're asking, but there is also a lot of activity that we do that has no commercial benefit, but it's about growing and developing the game up and down the country, and that's a prime example of, you know, what is right to help grow the game, what makes the most sense at this point in time. And from a women's national team perspective, it is taking the games around the country and getting more girls and women in local communities out to matches. And I don't know when the last time an international match was played at Dunfermline, but it'll be a while. But we're happy to do that, and you know, the club were delighted, the community were delighted, and as I said, nearly 6,000 of a crowd is significant for a women's A friendly for us at this point in time, and so we're always considering, you know, how do we grow the game, because it can't just always be about commercial revenue.
Okay. And finally, there is a voluntary code of conduct for right owners, which the SFA currently have not signed up to. Is that something you're considering as a reason why you haven't engaged with that process?
I'll be totally honest and tell you that was not something I was aware of.
Okay, perhaps you could
I will
write
find
back
out
to
about
us
that, and I'll
on
get back to you on that one.
That
yes.
issue. Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Oh, thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for your attendance at committee this morning.
Thank you.
And we now move into private session. Thank you.